are many match types in pro wrestling, with some standing the test of time while others are one and done. Either way, match stipulations offer great variety to pro wrestling shows, and they'll always be part of the pro wrestling we enjoy today. It must be pretty cool then to be a competitor who has their very own match type that was specifically created for your character or gimmick. It's like you're adding even more to the history books because you've got something else besides your standard in-ring achievements. In today's video, I want to look at a bunch of matches that were either created for or heavily associated with one particular wrestler, and I'm gonna try to be as strict as possible here. For example, many people would associate the ladder match with Shawn Michaels, but I wouldn't include it here because it wasn't a match that was made for HBK himself, so do keep that in mind. Some of the matches I include will only be associated to the wrestler by name only. So, for example, the Caribbean strap match for Savio Vega would have qualified even though it's just a basic strap match with a new name. First up, The Undertaker, and I can think of 4 matches that were created for or heavily associated with the dead man. Those being the casket match, the buried alive match, the last ride match, and the boneyard match. Many would have included Hell in a Cell here too, but I think that's a bit too broad. 165 casket matches have been recorded for The Undertaker, his first being against the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleFest in 1991 in a match that The Undertaker lost, though many would remember his match against Kamala the following year at the 1992 Survivor Series, a match that The Undertaker thankfully won. The most famous Undertaker casket match was probably against Yokozuna at the 1994 Royal Rumble, thanks to the spooky post-match promo The Undertaker cut from inside the coffin. And the final casket match Taker ever competed in was at the Greatest Royal Rumble event in 2018, where he defeated Rusev. The first ever buried alive match featured The Undertaker and Mankind. This one happened in 1996, and even though the dead man defeated Mankind in this match, it was The Undertaker who ended up getting buried when a bunch of heels showed up after the bell to put the Phenom away for good. This, of course, didn't work. The dead man's competed in 5 buried alive matches in total, winning 2 of them but losing 3, and it's a match type that really suits The Undertaker's character down to a T. The last ride match, where the loser gets put in a hearse and drove out of the arena, happened twice in the WWE, with The Undertaker losing the JBL at No Mercy 2004, but winning against Mr. Kennedy at Armageddon 2006. And then we have the Boneyard match, a cinematic match that was created out of necessity due to lockdown restrictions in 2020. The Undertaker defeated AJ Styles in this one and only match of its kind before riding off into the night. We maybe could have included body bag matches here too, but I think I've already named enough. The Undertaker really did possess a gimmick that was great for new match types. The Undertaker's little brother Kane had his own match type, the Inferno Match, and the match itself was a visual representation of Kane's past and the trauma that made him the monster he was. Kane and The Undertaker's pro wrestling storyline started all the way back when they were just kids. Their family funeral home got burned to the ground and Kane was presumed dead by The Undertaker. Paul Bearer would reveal years later that Kane was actually alive. The fire had seriously disfigured The Undertaker's little brother, and when Kane made his WWF debut, his whole persona was centered around hellfire and brimstone, as JR would famously say almost every week. The first Inferno matches featured both Kane and The Undertaker. The ring would be surrounded by flames that would jump up during big moves and big spots. To win the match, you had to set your opponent alight, so it was all for Kane to make his opponents feel the pain that he felt when he got caught in the funeral home fire. Only Kane would go on to lose 3 Inferno matches while only winning 1. Still, to me, Inferno matches always look great on TV, and seeing the ring surrounded with fire always looked really dangerous. Another match type that suited the gimmick down to the ground.
Because Big Papa Pump is your hookup! Holler if you hear me!
All gimmick matches aren't created equal, as Scotty Steiner would find out in WCW during the year 2000. Scott had his very own cage match, the Steiner Asylum, and Steiner Asylum matches were basically 2 or more guys fighting inside a giant bird cage that was placed in the middle of the ring. It's an extremely confined match type, and yeah, while being locked in there with Scotty Steiner would be pretty dangerous, it's a match type that didn't come across well on TV. There simply wasn't enough room for the guys to do anything that looked great, and on top of this, WCW's production team around this time period wasn't good at all. So they didn't try to get creative with camera angles, and they didn't try to rig the cage up with smaller cameras. The matches looked bad, and the action inside the Asylum wasn't good either. I put together a whole WCW Blunder video looking at the Steiner Asylum matches, so check that out if you want to learn more. On the flip side, Ken Shamrock had his own cage match in the WWF known as the Lion's Den. This one was heavily inspired by MMA style cages due to Ken's history in legit combat sports, and Ken's training camp was also known as the Lion's Den. Lion's Den matches were leagues better than Steiner Asylum matches, thanks to there being a lot more space for the competitors to work in, better production thanks to cameramen being situated on top of the Lion's Den itself. Plus, Shamrock always had good opponents inside the cage who, along with Ken himself, could use the cage in creative ways. Lion's Den matches disappeared when Shamrock decided not to return to the WWF back in 1999, but look up Shamrock vs Owen Hart at SummerSlam 98 and Shamrock vs Steve Blackman at SummerSlam 99. Steve Regal had the Marquis of Queensbury Rules series in WCW, and William Regal had the Duchess of Queensbury Rules match in WWE. In WCW, the Marquis of Queensbury Rules was a 5-round series heavily inspired by World of Sport Wrestling out of England. TV champion Steve Regal and world champion Ric Flair would compete in 5 matches or 5 rounds. Each round would have a 5-minute limit, and the winner would receive the Marquis of Queensbury Cup. This all went down in 1994, just before Hulk Hogan arrived at WCW, and in an era where WCW weekly television was dominated by squash matches, these mat-based contests were a very welcome change. It's just a bit odd seeing these kind of matches take place at Disney MGM. Regal would lose to Flair with 1 win, 2 losses and 2 draws. And if you haven't watched this best of 5 series, then that's your homework for tonight. Good stuff here from both competitors. The Duchess of Queensbury Rules match, or the Duchess of Queensbury? Yeah, this was very different. The Duchess herself overseen the bout pitting Steve Regal against Chris Jericho, and she pretty much stacked the deck against Chris at every given opportunity. For example, when Chris delivered a lion salt, the Duchess announced that the first round time limit had expired, which stopped Jericho from pinning Regal. And when Regal topped out of the walls of Jericho, the Duchess announced that the match couldn't end in submission. There was no way Chris could win, and so Steve Regal walked out of Backlash 2001 with an easy victory under his belt. At WrestleMania 12, Razor Ramon was originally going to face Goldust in a Miami street fight, even though WrestleMania 12 was held in California. The match was announced on WWF TV, it would air via satellite, and then Razor announced that he was heading to WCW and he got conveniently suspended for failing a drug test. The WWF needed a new idea, and so the Hollywood Backlot Brawl was created, seeing as Goldust was obsessed with movies and Hollywood. Admittedly, this one was kinda created out of necessity, but Goldust and his opponent, Roddy Piper, definitely made the most of it. Goldust took a beating in the backlot on this evening. There's plenty of stiff shots and things do get pretty violent for 1996 WWF standards. Goldust ends up driving his gold Cadillac right into Piper before trying to make an escape. And then, bizarrely, the WWF used footage from the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase on the LA freeway to show Piper hunting Goldust down. The announcers, including Vince McMahon, even said the footage looked familiar, which is, I think it's really stupid. Later, at WrestleMania 12, the two competitors made it back to the Anaheim pond. Piper ripped Goldust's gear off and old Dustin was wearing some lady's underwear. And after a knee to the groin, Roddy Piper was declared the winner of the match. A match that didn't even have a referee. While the match did go downhill as WrestleMania continued on, the first portion of the bout was pretty decent for its time. It's definitely been surpassed now, but back then it was good to see the WWF get a bit more violent and a bit more gritty. Mankind has his own match type, the Boiler Room Brawl, because Mankind lived inside arena boiler rooms, apparently. While on the surface, this looks like another typical backstage brawl, there is an added stipulation here, that being, you must leave the boiler room to win the match. WCW tried to rip this off by having the ever-charismatic Jerry Flynn compete in his own match type known as The Block. But block matches were terrible, seeing as WCW used weird video filters during the match, and it became pretty funny when Jerry Flynn would keep losing his own signature match type. It wasn't a conscious booking decision, or at least I don't think it was, but Jerry would act all tough talking about how dangerous the block was, but then he'd always get his ass kicked. Boiler Room Brawls were always better, and the most memorable one was easily the first, Mankind vs Undertaker at SummerSlam 96. The rules of the first Boiler Room Brawl were slightly different. In this one, you had to leave the boiler room and also make it to the ring to claim the Undertaker's sacred urn from Paul Bearer. Taker had it won, Paul decided to turn on the Phenom, and Bearer presented the urn to Mankind. It was pretty shocking to see the relationship between Bearer and the Undertaker end in this fashion, and the Boiler Room Brawl would turn out to be a highlight of the whole SummerSlam 96 card. What might surprise you though is that Mick Foley has only competed in 4 Boiler Room Brawls throughout his entire career. He beat The Undertaker in the first one ever, he defeated The Big Show at Backlash 99, Triple H defeated Mick on a September 99 episode of SmackDown when Vince McMahon booked the game in 5 different matches in one night, and then Triple H, dressed up as Santa Claus, defeated Mankind once again inside the Boiler Room in a December 99 episode of Raw's War. Going back to cage matches very briefly, the WCW House of Pain cage match in storyline was created by the Revolution on the 15th of November 99. The Revolution were feuding with the Filthy Animals at the time, and Shane Douglas announced that he and his teammates had come up with the most cruel and sadistic cage match in WCW history, a match that would end the Filthy Animals for good. Fans were expecting something even more crazy than War Games, but instead, it's just a standard WCW cage match that had handcuffs attached to the cage panels. In order to win, you have to handcuff your opponents to the cage, and then you're free to do whatever you want to them. The match itself was used as a way for the Revolution to put Rey Mysterio out of action, seeing as he needed to disappear from WCW television again to get knee surgery. But this match type would stay in WCW, with 4 more House of Pain cage matches being set up at shows. Sting and Vampiro had a match in the cage in mid-2000, and on the same evening, Miss Elizabeth was scheduled to face Medusa in the House of Pain, although that one didn't actually happen. In WCW, Raven had Raven's rules. Basically, he would compete in matches that had no DQ and no countouts, and sometimes a Raven's rules match would even have no referee. When Raven first appeared in WCW, the company devised an interesting storyline for him. That being, he wouldn't sign a WCW contract because he didn't want to conform and bow down to the corporate suits who ran World Championship Wrestling. When it was time for Raven to compete, he would only do so if he was permitted to use his own match policies, and that's how Raven's Rules matches came to be. It was a way for WCW to incorporate some no DQ action that Raven was known for during his time in ECW, and Raven's Rules were even extended to his teammates within Raven's flock. As time went on, WCW got a bit confused and you wouldn't know if a match was being contested under Raven's rules or not. Sometimes it wasn't announced, but then when Raven used the weapon, the commentators would be like, oh, it must be Raven's rules again. But generally speaking, I think it all worked very well, and it was a good way to add an extra layer to the Raven character. He somehow managed to get his very own special treatment, and WCW had no choice but to abide. In TNA, Raven also had the Clockwork Orange House of Fun match, a match that Raven actually came up with himself. Poles were attached to the ring posts that then had chains hanging from them. The chains are then attached to the poles to create a kind of clothesline, and from these chains, competitors can grab weapons. In the first match, the only way to win was to throw your opponent through a few tables after throwing them from a small scaffold named Raven's Perch, but subsequent matches were changed to Falls Count Anywhere. From the extreme and hardcore to the sometimes goofiness of the WWF's New Generation era, Henry O. Godwin had his very own match type, a one and done deal known as the Arkansas Hogpen match. This match type played into both Henry's gimmick and the gimmick of Henry's opponent at In Your House 5, Mr. Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Helmsley was a Greenwich blue blood who enjoyed the finer things in life, a real stuck-up aristocrat who thought everyone was beneath him. And then you had Henry Godwin, a hog farmer who liked to throw buckets of disgusting slop on his enemies and even on himself. These two were polar opposites, and the snobby Hunter Hearst Helmsley found himself competing in a match against Henry that could see him getting thrown into a disgusting hog pen that was set up inside the Hershey Park Arena in December of '95. No one cared if Henry got covered in pig shit, everyone wanted to see Hunter get dirty. Helmsley was able to win the match, but thanks to special referee Hillbilly Jim, the Greenwich Blue Bloods still ended up rolling around with the dirty little piggies. And I don't think anyone out there is ever going to call this one a classic. It's memorable for sure, but maybe for all the wrong reasons. Another match type that's also kinda memorable for all the wrong reasons is the Punjabi prison match. A match that was originally built around the Great Khali, but Khali didn't even compete in the first Punjabi prison, seeing as he tested positive for elevated liver enzymes just before the Great American Bash in 2006. Super Crazy and Bobby Lashley also tested positive, so changes had to be made to this pay-per-view, which was going to host the first ever Punjabi prison bout in WWE history. The Big Show took over, wrestling The Undertaker in a match that quite honestly sucked. And so here you had the Great Khali getting his very own match type that he couldn't even compete in. The following year, Khali was finally able to step into this god-awful structure for a match against Batista, and 10 years after this, the WWE brought the Punjabi prison back when Jinder Mahal defended his WWE Championship against Randy Orton. Khali did make an appearance during this match though. Sergeant Slaughter had his own match type, the Boot Camp match. Not too dissimilar to a Ravens Rules match, this is simply no DQ, no countout, and anything goes. Slaughter began having boot camp matches in the early 80s, but it was the matches against the Iron Sheik during the mid 80s that most people are going to remember. Quite a few of these were recorded for TV, and you do have a fair few options to choose from. The MSG and Landover encounters are available on YouTube, so look them up when you have a chance. WWF boot camp matches would retire along with Slaughter in the early 90s. However, when the Sarge was appointed as the new WWF commissioner and when he struggled to keep DX in check, he took on Triple H in a boot camp match at In Your House D-Generation X in December of '97, a match that Triple H won. Another boot camp match would take place the following year when Slaughter took on Al Snow, and again the Sarge lost. So if you want to see Mr. G.I. Joe kicking ass in his own speciality match type, you're definitely better off checking out his work in the 80s. At WrestleMania 36, Bray Wyatt got his own speciality match, the same WrestleMania where The Undertaker had his Boneyard match. As explained earlier, the Boneyard match was put together out of necessity due to lockdown restrictions, and Bray's Firefly Funhouse match was also coupled together under the same circumstances, though to the WWE's credit, both encounters were very, very different. The Firefly Funhouse was Bray's very own space where viewers were introduced to Wyatt's little friends. On the surface it looked like harmless fun, but some sinister and dark stuff was going on behind the scenes. Because inside the Firefly Funhouse dwelled Bray's alter ego, The Fiend. And during this era, The Fiend was one of the most unsavoury characters the WWE had on its roster. John Cena would enter the Firefly Funhouse at Mania 36, and what followed can be best described as a fever dream. A very strange and unique match where Bray Wyatt made John face all his insecurities. I got ripped apart when I said I wasn't a huge fan of this match, and I still feel the same way about it now. Yes, I did enjoy seeing John wearing the NWO gear, and I definitely applaud the WWE and Bray for coming up with something so out of the box and so unique. So just because I'm not a fan of what they produced, it doesn't mean I don't appreciate the effort that went into it. The story they tried to tell was great, the execution of the whole thing was where my main issue lies. Still, wrestling was in a pretty weird place during this time period, and WrestleMania 36 will live on forever as that one WrestleMania that we all watched during some pretty uncanny times. And the Firefly Funhouse encounter, in my opinion, can best be described as a pretty uncanny match. The Dudley Boys were associated with tables. Bubba Ray and Devon liked to break some furniture when hurting their opponents. The Hardy Boys were associated with ladders thanks to their death-defying aerial attacks from way upstairs. And Edge and Christian got fond of using chairs. They even began performing the concerto in an effort to smash their opponent's brains in. Put the Dudley Boys tables, the Hardy Boys ladders, and Edge and Christian's chairs all together and you've got TLC. An exciting match type that was introduced thanks to these three pretty amazing tag teams. These boys had all squared off in the past. Most famously, the Hardy Boys took on Edge and Christian in a ladder match at No Mercy 99. The Dudleys then took on the Hardys in a tables match at the 2000 Royal Rumble. And at WrestleMania 2000, all three teams squared off in a triangle ladder match. A match that also included tables, but not in an official manner, so to speak. At SummerSlam 2000, these three teams would compete in the first ever TLC match, with every team now having their weapon of choice firmly established. And like their previous encounters, the guys completely stole the show. Nothing but pure chaos, dangerous spots, and dangerous moves. The next TLC match is probably the one that's best remembered. TLC 2 took place at WrestleMania 17, and the three teams took the match to a whole new level for the biggest show of the year. This time, each team also had a little backup. Edge and Christian had Rhino waiting in the wings, Matt and Jeff had Lita just like they did back at SummerSlam, and the Dudley Boys had little Spike Dudley to back them up. Edge's spear to Jeff Hardy became one of the most replayed and well-remembered WrestleMania moments of all time, and the TLC match became so popular that, to date, there's been 30 TLC matches contested within a WWE ring, with no doubt a lot more to follow. The match type even got its very own pay-per-view. No matter who competes in these bouts nowadays, fans will always remember the originators. And the TLC match wouldn't be a thing if it weren't for Edge and Christian, the Dudleys and the Hardys. Abyss had the Monsters Ball in TNA, and the original idea for these matches was actually quite deprived. The key premise of the match was that all contenders were put in solitary confinement with no food, water, or light for 24 hours before the match took place. This was done to build up a ton of aggression within the competitors, but I don't know, man. It would just make me really hungry and probably a bit tired. The competitors were then unleashed upon each other. There were no disqualifications, no countouts. Weapon usage was very much encouraged, and whoever got a pin or submission first would win the Monsters Ball. The match type was Abyss's speciality. While employed by TNA, he competed in almost every early Monsters Ball match, or he'd be associated with it in one way or another. The match was even presented during weekly TV presentations and TNA house shows. And though TNA continues to present these matches on TV, Abyss took the match type with him too when working away from TNA during 2016 to 2019. What's good about the Monsters Ball is that yes, while the early matches were quite theatrical, what with the competitors getting locked up and whatnot, TNA were pretty well known for coming up with gimmick matches that were maybe a bit too convoluted and a bit, well, let's be honest, shit. The Monsters Ball was simply a hardcore match with a little extra drama added in, and it worked well. No elaborate props, no elaborate structures, just good old-fashioned hardcore wrestling with a little bit of silliness thrown in beforehand. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. You'll get 3 new videos every week, including Raw and Nitro reviews, pay-per-view reviews from the Monday Night War, and other random wrestling videos like the one you just watched. Let me know the wrestler signature matches I've left out of this video by using the comment section, and also let me know what other topics you'd like to see covered on the channel. The list of names you're seeing right now are all the lovely people who support Wrestling Bios on Patreon. If you too want to support the channel, get access to some exclusive stuff not available on YouTube, while also seeing all the YouTube videos early without ad breaks, then follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you so much for watching everyone, and please take care.